Well, hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to the show. Now, antibiotics, or the lack of new ones being produced, is really a big concern. And even a little over 2 years ago, the World Health Organization put out this press release and it said, the world is running out of antibiotics. Quite a scary thought, but there's not a whole lot of hyperbole to that. We do have some real issues with that. Let's take a look at see what the WHO said in 2017, September 2017. They put out a new report called the Antibacterial Agents in Clinical Development, an analysis of the antibacterial clinical development pipeline, including tuberculosis. And it showed a serious lack of new antibiotics under development to combat the growing threat of antimicrobial resistance. It says most of the drugs currently in the clinical pipeline are modifications of existing classes of antibiotics and are only short-term solutions. The report also found that very few potential treatment options for those antibiotic-resistant infections identified by the World Health Organization as posing the greatest threat to health, including drug-resistant TB, which kills around 250,000 people per year. Now, in addition to the multi-drug resistant TB, WHO has identified 12 classes of priority pathogens, some of them causing common infections such as pneumonia or UTIs. They are increasingly resistant to existing antibiotics and urgently in need of new treatments. The report identified 51 new antibiotics and biologics in clinical development to treat priority antibiotic-resistant pathogens, as well as TB and sometimes deadly diarrheal infection C. difficile. All of these candidate medicines, however, among all these candidate medicines, there are only 8 that are classified by WHO as innovative treatments that will add value to the current antibiotic treatment arsenal. So that's not a very promising thing to see, and this was just 2 years ago. There are also very few oral antibiotics in the pipeline, yet these are essential formulations for treating infections outside of hospitals on an outpatient basis or in resource-limited settings. Okay, so let's move on. So this brings us to last year in April, and a company called Achaogen, an antibiotic company, filed for bankruptcy protection. And let's see what happened. They filed for bankruptcy in mid-April through a voluntary petition for Chapter 11 protection in federal court. The San Francisco, California-based drug maker is also seeking legal okay to pursue an auction and sale. And basically, they just were not making any money. So let's take a look at what the experts had to say on it. Multiple reductions in the size of its staff and scope of its work proved insufficient for Achaogen to stave off Chapter 11. Neither was a FDA approval last June 2018, of its first drug, a once-daily antibiotic, plasmicin. You may have already heard of that. Generically plasmicin, Zemdry was the trade name. And it said, even Zemdry's approval brought challenges, as the FDA only approved the drug for a certain complicated UTI, but did not approve or give the company okay for bloodstream infections. So that hurt the company there. In a related editorial published in the New England Journal of Medicine, 2 FDA directors and a Brigham and Women's Hospital's clinical research director characterized such challenges as endemic in antimicrobial development. They go on to say, quote, those who have followed this field will recognize that scientific challenges and economic strain are not the exception, but represent the typical scenario that is faced when a new antibacterial drug is developed, they wrote. So, yeah, big problem with just the type of drugs, how they're used, and the finances that go behind all this. And it's just not a very profitable drug to do, antibiotics or not. That brings us up to a couple of weeks ago, and we saw this pretty horrible headline that the antibiotic company Melinta was restructuring, and they were going to initiate a voluntary Chapter 11 process to effectuate the restructuring transaction while continuing normal course operations. So they're not out of business, but they are restructuring. And it says Melinta Therapeutics, a commercial stage company focused on the development and commercialization of novel antibiotics to treat serious bacterial infections, on December 27th announced that it had entered into a restructuring support agreement with the lenders under its senior credit facility, Deerfield Private Design Fund. Under the agreement, supporting lenders would acquire the company as a going concern by exchanging $140 million of secured claims arising under its senior credit facility for 100% of the equity to be issued by the reorganized company. Anyway, to get away from all of that, they do say that the company intends to operate its business in the normal course while it works to complete the transaction through the Chapter 11 process. Now, quote, while we have successfully conserved cash and enhanced revenue over the past several quarters, we nevertheless anticipate challenges in meeting the company's obligations, including near-term compliance with certain covenants, said Jennifer Sanfilippo, interim CEO. We are confident that this process will secure new ownership of the business with the financial resources to support the company's antibiotics portfolio and ensure these potentially life-threatening products continue to get to patients in need. So, pretty big news out of Melinta. And if you're not familiar with the Melinta produces, they are the largest pure-play antibiotics company. It has 4 marketed products that include Baxdela, Vabomere, Orbactive, and Minicin. And this portfolio provides Melinta with the unique ability to provide providers and patients with a range of solutions that can meet the tremendous needs for novel antibiotics treating serious infections. Now, the Infectious Diseases Society of America had a lot to say about this situation with Melinta. And it says, Melinta's bankruptcy highlights the challenges that antibiotic producers are currently facing. Any closure or stop in production of their company would put into jeopardy the continued availability of its 4 antibiotics that I've already mentioned. Life-saving tools that patients cannot afford to lose given our already limited antibiotic arsenal. And they go on to say, like other antibiotic companies that have faced challenges or even closed in recent years, Melinta faces the challenge that the development of antibiotics used infrequently and for short durations and held in reserve to protect their effectiveness does not return quick profits to investors. If Melinta does not successfully complete the Chapter 11 process, it would further decrease the likelihood that investors would take the risk of supporting antibiotic research and development. This bankruptcy underscores the need for swift federal government support and incentives to ensure the availability of effective antibiotics. Then it says, Melinta's bankruptcy announcement is even more concerning in the wake of recent report from the CDC that more than 2.5 million illnesses and 35,000 fatalities are caused by infections that existing medicines no longer effectively treat. The announcement of yet another antibiotics company going through challenges highlights a continuing crisis to which policymakers should respond. And then it does talk about the Disarm Act, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Okay, and here I want to go ahead and just play this short clip. The gentleman's name is Alan Koikel, and he's with the Pew Charitable Trust, and he has some interesting words to say about this issue with antibiotics.
Usually if you have a good new drug, you want to use a lot of it and you sell a lot of it and companies make money. With antibiotics, if you have a good new antibiotic, you mostly want to leave it on the shelf so that resistance doesn't emerge. And as a result, new antibiotics don't produce very much revenue and companies are going out of business. You can actually look at the stock prices of a few recent companies that had antibiotics approved by the FDA, and the stock price actually went down, not up, when the drugs were approved. And that's an indication that the market is really not very optimistic about the sales of these drugs. Well, what we can tell for sure at this point is the market, if left alone, is not going to fix itself. Companies won't be able to make enough money selling these drugs. They'll get out of the business. They won't draw future investment. We're already, to some extent, the government is subsidizing the upfront R&D costs. What Congress is looking at now and what they need to act on are measures to either change the reimbursement for antibiotics or make additional payments so that this becomes a viable business model for companies in the future.
Okay, so clearly we have some serious problems with antibiotics and the manufacture of them, and the issue concerning antimicrobial research and the profitability and the discovery of new treatments. Big concern. Well, back in June of last year, a piece of legislation was introduced in the Senate. And let's take a look at it. It says, U.S. Senators Bob Casey and Johnny Isakson introduced legislation this week, this is back in June of 2019, to help advance research and new treatments for drug-resistant infections. The Developing an Innovative Strategy for Antimicrobial Resistant Microorganisms Act of 2019, or the Disarm Act of 2019 for short, aims to strengthen the antimicrobial research and development pipeline and provide access to more effective treatment for the more than 2 million Americans who are infected with drug-resistant infections each year. Quote, the increase in antibiotic-resistant bacteria is a major public health issue that leads to countless preventable deaths and is costing the U.S. healthcare system billions of dollars, said Senator Casey. The Disarm Act would strengthen the pipeline that brings effective medication to the patient bedside to help save the lives of 23,000 Americans who die each year from drug-resistant infections. And go on, this is what Senator Isakson had to say. Antibiotic and antifungal resistant infections are on the rise, and our researchers, physicians, hospitals, and other healthcare providers need every opportunity to advance research and therapies for Americans. I've been proud to support the legislation that accelerates the approval process for new antibiotics, but we do need to ensure that there is a market for breakthrough innovations once they are developed. The Disarm Act would encourage development of new therapies and directly address the challenge of drug-resistant infections in hospitals. And then we had a quote here from Dr. Cynthia Sears from the IDSA, and she says, quote, the Disarm Act is essential and timely. Patients desperately need new antibiotics to treat serious or life-threatening infections caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And without new incentives like the Disarm Act, the antibiotic pipeline will continue to crumble. So, yeah. So what is the status of this legislation? Well, I did go to congress.gov to take a look at it, and Senate Bill 1712 the Disarm Act of 2019. The latest action, according to Congress.gov, is on June 4th, 2019. It was read twice and referred to the Committee on Finance. And let's see if there's any other information we can find out about this bill. Now, that's it, read twice and referred to the Committee on Finance in the Senate. Now, there is a related bill in the House, H.R. 4100, the Disarm Act of 2019. And this latest action with them was on July 30, 2019, where it was referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, and in addition to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, for a period to be subsequently determined by the Speaker, in each case for consideration of such provisions as fall within the jurisdiction of the committee concerned. So it doesn't look like it has gone very far in the past 6 months plus. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that, the Disarm Act of 2019, and find out what its status is. And it's something we should all be concerned about, antimicrobial resistance, and just this pipeline of new antibiotics, new novel therapeutics, almost appears to be drying up. And that'll take us back decades, and it'll be very, very tragic. So I thought this would be an interesting topic to take a look at. And going back to when the World Health Organization said 2.5 years ago that, hey, we may be having an antibiotic crisis. And I'm not saying it's a crisis yet, but boy, it sure is not looking good in some aspects. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the show. Please go ahead and comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Share it with your friends. That's the best way to get this spread around. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like this video, and I'll see you next time on Outbreak News TV.